Hello, you're watching news from Kazakhstan. It is Wednesday, October 17th. I am Nurbek Savitakhunov. Police detain a suspect in the murder of Alexander Bazhenko, who was a witness in the case over mass riots in Zhanaozen. As was reported by the local police department, the crime was caused by an act of hooliganism and had no political motives. More details in the next report. At 3 a.m., Alexander Bazhenko went outside to buy water in the store, where he witnessed how two men were arguing with a saleslady over 35 cents. Alexander interfered in the dispute, asking to leave the woman alone while paying off 35 cents out of his pocket. Yet those two waited outside for Bazhenko and attacked him for interfering in the argument. That is the official version. According to police, the argument escalated into a fight. Alexander Bazhenko was beat up by two unidentified men and left outside Khan Shatri restaurant on this very spot. Approximately at 5:15 a.m., Bazhenko was found by the police squad in serious condition. However, he died later in hospital. Alexander Bazhenko was a witness at the high-profile trial in Aktau. Initially, he anonymously testified under the name of Kairat Alpazbayev as a prosecution witness, yet later returned to the courtroom and admitted that he was forced to testify under pressure. Bazhenko's death intimidated other witnesses in the city, including the family of Bazarbai Kenjabayev, who was murdered by the police. He told the truth in court. He even admitted himself that it will cost him. He was right, he is dead now. What if somebody else gets killed in a little while? Why do people die for the truth? They should not. Should anything happen to me one of these days, I do not even know whom to tell about it. My mother is sick. Official authorities claim that a young man's death was caused by hooliganism and that a hidden political motive is not an issue in this case. They particularly refuse to link his death to the fact that Alexander served as a witness at the trial. The chief of Main Department of Internal Affairs of Zhanaozen, Mangildi Dosakhanov, agreed to talk to the reporters without camera, and the following is his assessment of the situation. The suspects were detained and they fully admitted their guilt. A criminal case under Article 132 was initiated against the 19-year-olds Nursultan Dolyashov and Kuat Rzabekov. The funeral visitation will be held on Wednesday in the Orthodox Church of Aktau. A minute of silence over Bazhenko's death was observed during an expert discussion over referendum issues on Tuesday. Alexander Bazhenko, who was brutally beaten a few days ago and spent 2 days in intensive care, died today. The 20-year-old orphan, who was a witness at the trial of 37 oil workers and was the first to speak of tortures used to defame the accused. Co-chairman of Azad Party suggested to pay tribute to Alexander with a minute of silence. On Tuesday, the police detained suspects in the murder of Bazhenko, whose body was found in Zhanaozen earlier. Preliminary data suggests domestic violence as the reason. At the same time, Alexander was one of the few people who openly spoke about tortures used during Zhanaozen riots investigation. There is a possibility it was done out of revenge. In his speech during the trial, Bazhenko spoke of how police officers threatened him, but he still wanted to live in truth and accepted that there will be consequences. People are not murdered for $1 or because someone said something. Meanwhile, the referendum session brings back publication of contracts and nationalization of strategic enterprises on the agenda. The initiators of the referendum declare that companies privatized during the 1990s must belong to the people and the state. Find out more next. Politicians and social activists are planning to put the proposals concerning publishing contracts and gradually returning large enterprises into government property to a referendum. At a meeting in Almaty, another proposal option was offered to transfer 51% of the stock to government property and 49% to the Kazakh people. Economist Uligen Askarov thinks that the government can get the shares. First, the government does have its share of the companies such as ENRC and Kazakhmys. Thus, there is no need to take up 100% of the shares. Second, the National Fund of Kazakhstan is growing quite rapidly. According to the preliminary data of the National Bank, there was about $55 billion in the National Fund by the 1st of September. Once a prominent businessman, the politician Bulat Abilov remembers those troubled times when factories and fields suddenly got their owners. He believes that people need to witness the details of all contracts. All of us have witnessed how current owners of Sokolovo-Sarbaysky Balkhash Mineral Processing Industrial Association, MIS, Kazakhstan Investment, Kazakh International Corporation, Pavlodar Aluminum Plant, Usk-Kamenogorsk Lead Plant used their connections with the Prime Minister and then the President's team to acquire these enterprises. Journalist Seyd Kazym Ataev is an avid supporter of the idea of a referendum. He has also witnessed that time when the fate of city-forming enterprises was decided behind closed doors.
I think those enterprises need to be nationalized. During the 1990s, we made contracts regardless of the fact that we lacked both competent lawyers and international audits. However, skeptics are trying to cool down such enthusiasm. Lawyer Vitaly Voronov doubts whether the idea of the popular vote is practicable. But if the government eventually makes concessions, supporters of the idea have to develop specific statements for a plebiscite. The referendum could be held in strict accordance with the issue. The desired result can be obtained provided that the wants of power and the referendum coincide. At the end of the meeting, the majority voted in favor of the resolution. Now the initiative group has come into play. The organizers promised to present the results of their work to the press.
Miners of Kazakhstan Eurotech Service Company declared a strike on Tuesday by staying underground. Workers of the enterprise, which is a branch of Kazakhmys, demand an increase of salaries. Top management of Eurotech Service Prosecution Office and members of local administration arrived to the company headquarters. Negotiations between workers and labor union leaders are continuing. According to representatives of trade unions, there is a very tense situation at the enterprise. Workers say the administration is not following the collective agreement, exerts pressure on trade union leaders, and drives down wages.
Up to 40 people are in the mine and in the shaft, but we are not completely sure. We want Eurotech Service to sign an agreement with our labor union, Decent Labor, on the increase of wages, compliance with the collective agreement, and everything else.
The trial of Vladimir Kozlov in Akhtau is a political order of the authorities, say members of Semey Regional Public Committee for the Protection of Political Prisoners.
According to civil society activist Farid Ishmuhametov, it is time for the people who cannot stay indifferent to unite, as nowadays the authorities refuse to pay attention to anyone with independent views on the political situation in the country. The activists of Semey believe that Vladimir Kozlov's trial and sentence were politically motivated. We have held pickets outside the NSC headquarters, addressed international organizations, embassies, calling them to note the political motivation of the trial in Akhtau. The accused, including oil workers and Vladimir Kozlov, should not be the ones liable. We all know that when oil workers were on strike, many people visited them in Zhanaozen, including Bolat Abilov and Zharmakhan Tuyakbay, yet Kozlov was the only one tried. In fact, only Kozlov received prison time.
Member of European Parliament Paul Murphy commented on the recent vote over the agreement between Kazakhstan and the European Union. To recap, on Monday, Murphy's amendments over the events in Zhanaozen were not supported by his colleagues. MEP offered to stop negotiations and insisted on independent investigations of the events. Murphy noted that he will continue to follow the situation in Kazakhstan and plans to visit the country in the nearest future to support and demand the release of political prisoners, in particular Vladimir Kozlov and Arona Tabek, as well as Rosa Tultaeva, an activist of oil workers' strike in Zhanaozen.
I believe that if the European Parliament was to stick to its own fine words of respecting its principles of human rights and democracy, it would demand that the Council and the European Commission halt the negotiations on this agreement. Unfortunately, my amendment was rejected by all the major political groups. It is a further illustration of how, at the end of the day, the EU's economic and commercial interests, represented by the bigger political groups in this Parliament, take precedent over workers and human rights.
On to other news. The recent incident with the wiretapping in the apartment of Bakhit Tumenova, president of Amansaulik Public Fund, forced her to organize surveillance of the Utilities Committee. According to her, inside the premises of the committee, there was an unidentified person who supposedly installed the wiretapping equipment in her house. Tumenova, her neighbors and supporters stood guard by the apartment until the evening, but decided to disperse after all. As a result, no one saw the organizer.
We thought initially to have the 24-hour surveillance installed, but some of the volunteers say they already spend the night here to keep things under control. Then at around 5 p.m., after I thought of the people sitting there and felt sorry for them, I called them up and said that we are removing the surveillance so they can let their guy out.
Human rights activists are asking for help. During a press conference in Astana, the public union Kadir Kasiyet and the Bureau for Human Rights published the results of a 9-month-long monitoring. According to it, within this period, over 200 human rights activists were pressured, including 80 women. The most common penalties are administrative arrests and forced interrogations. More details next.
A special monitoring exercise was conducted by one of the public organizations, Kadir 202 human rights activists suffered from various forms of threats in the 9 months of this year. These are labor unions, activists, independent media representatives, and private lawyers. Almaty, Zhanaozen, Karaganda, Zhezkazgan, Aktau, Uralsk, and Shymkent are among the leaders, but two regions where the number of threats have increased stand out. A similar press conference was conducted by activists in the summer, and even then there were warnings that the situation with the safety of human rights activists is worsening. Requests to create a special committee were sent to the parliamentarians, Dariga Nazarbayeva and Aygul Solovyova, and to the Prime Minister, but the answer never came while the number of people under pressure increased by 50. One of the infamous cases is pressure on the whole editorial office when 60 staff members of Almaty TV channel submitted their resignations, citing the interference of the mayor's office press secretary in the editorial policy. But if it was somewhat possible to withstand the pressure in Almaty and Astana, it was more difficult to do that outside the capital, says Zhezkazgan's journalist Berik Zhagaparov. The newspaper he works for published the article about the November 1st flood, when because of the overfilled irrigation channel, 105 houses were destroyed and 2 people died. The newspaper followed this closely, and now they're being punished by the local authorities. 4 other media outlets have been given the green light by the authorities, but they belong either to the mayor's office or to the national company Kazmys. All the local authorities in Kazmys care about is that this information is not leaked anywhere. If Astana does not know, then the problem does not exist. People like us are only a nuisance for them. We hinder their money-making schemes. This woman, Zinaida Mukhortova, is in a rush to reach a bus station right after the press conference. She has a ticket for the bus to her native city of Balkhash. A year ago, she was released from the psychiatric clinic where, according to her, she was admitted because of the Senator Yerlan Nigmatulin. In 2009, the lawyer was careless enough to write a complaint against him to Nurotan Party, saying that one of the Nigmatulin twin brothers is influencing the judges in Balkhash. The woman was arrested for false denunciation, declared insane, and sent to the clinic. I am afraid to say a word, to voice my opinion, you understand that? I've been pressured so much, and now I understand that fighting with authorities trying to prove you are right is fraught with consequences. From now on, I am not going to pay attention to the troubles of others. What is most important now is to clear the name so that the grandchildren can freely attend school, says Zinaida. That is why she came for the briefing to the country's capital. She is still considered an insane person in Balkhash, and now, after the speech in front of journalists, doctors might declare her insane again. She is only afraid that they might administer psychotropic agents, since she already has heart problems.
Banks are not making concessions to their borrowers and continue beating debts out of them through courts and collection companies. All of this is happening against the backdrop of frequent suicide and increased social tension among borrowers. Around 40 activists of Leave Housing to the People Public Association once again took to the streets in Astana to ask for deputies' help. However, police officers blocked their path to the parliament.
Вот зачем вы так ругаетесь? Зачем так ругаетесь? Могли бы спокойно сказать. Пожалуйста, пожалуйста. Если установленный порядок.
Activists of the movement Leave Housing to the People say there are over 700 of them by now, and their only demand is for banks to make concessions and set the payoff amounts in accordance with incomes. Only 6 movement members were allowed inside the parliament. Lawmakers listened to their demands and promised to look into the issue. Just like always, this did not please the activists who declared that if specific steps are not taken within 1 month, they will organize a mass hunger strike in front of the parliament building. No one is refusing to pay since it is the only housing we have, but we have problems with banks and court-martials. Banks are suing us and courts impose enormous interest fees upon us. They are not satisfied when the loan is taken and a certain part is paid off. Court-martials are outsourcing cases to collecting firms, and these guys are just like bouncers. They just ask to vacate our apartments, but we are not going anywhere. We will not become homeless.
Meanwhile, in Karaganda, the first court hearing in the case of Bisobo apartment complex residents was to take place on Tuesday. The apartment block collapsed in the month of April. The hearing was postponed. It turns out officials are not yet ready for litigation.
15 of 160 victims opposed the agreement. According to unofficial data, the rest are afraid to get involved in the conflict with government, as it could negatively reflect on their jobs. Yevgeny Tankov, the legal representative of 15 plaintiffs, says the residents fear that the government could leave them homeless. In the assignment agreement, officials have specified neither the date of substantial completion of the new apartment building nor the amount of compensation in case it is not built. Moreover, Tankov notes that the agreement features over 50 grammar and spelling errors. This agreement is deceiving from the first words to the last. It does not take any liabilities regarding schedules and does not even specify the time frame. It is also binding to a loan agreement, which is also proposed to be signed mandatory by the city administration and utilities department. Thus, every second item in the loan agreement can virtually deprive the residents of Bisoba of everything they could claim for. According to the final report of the Special Commission investigating the circumstances and causes of the emergency, the real estate developer is to blame for the collapse of the apartment building. The damage is estimated at around $3.2 million, including $2.2 million in the cost of the lost housing. Other apartment buildings in Bisoba have been also found in emergency condition. Thus, it was decided to raze the entire complex and construct a new one in its place.
Something to look forward to. Bread and flour prices in the country will not be raised, forecast Ministry of Agriculture Executive Secretary Evgeny Aman at the Parliament session.
Reporting about the harvest, Aman said that the volume of grain stocks, including from previous years, will be more than enough for the country, and even to export 8 million tons abroad. However, according to Kazakh marketing, bread prices have already exceeded set limits of 2 cents in a number of regions. In the meantime, Aman assures that the authorities are taking all necessary measures to stabilize the situation. On Monday, Nursultan Nazarbayev himself instructed the parliament not to allow for the bread prices to rise further. I repeat, we control the market with a fairly large amount of 1,300 tons of grain, which will be turned into flour and bread. This is 50% of our country's demand. Therefore, this volume would significantly impact the price control.
It wasn't only bread that rose in prices in Kazakhstan. Merchants are changing price tags on flour, cooking oil, vegetables, fish, rice, pasta, eggs, meat, and dairy products. These products rose in price from 0.3 to 3%. Last year, the Republic found itself in 4th place on the list of countries with a sharp increase in food prices.
Gabidullah Abdurrahmanov, head of the Anti-Monopoly Committee, says that the rise in prices is caused by inexpensive, high-quality goods imported from other countries of the customs union. The official proposes to make local manufacturers more competitive, since the government will not be able to support them after joining the WTO. Experts also note a negative trend which sees the number of local companies decreasing in the country. There were 4.5 thousand of operating enterprises in 2004, and half of them vanished by 2011, since businessmen no longer saw any profit in producing food products.
В России бензин дороже, электричество дороже, зарплата выше, НДС выше, но...
This shows that we do not have new production facilities, and there are no modernization or investments. Our companies used to produce a certain volume of goods that was specifically intended for Kazakhstan and its 15 million people market, whereas Russian manufacturers are looking at a market of 150 million.
Либо себестоимость высокая, это говорит о том, что нет новых производств, нет модернизации и инвестиций.
The Shymkent traffic police is withholding credible information on the number of road accidents in the city, says the Kazakh prosecutor after an inspection. According to official data, in the 7 months of this year, there were 227 accidents with 50 fatalities. Prosecutor voiced a much larger number, 782 road accidents. According to the supervising agency, 85 people died on the road. Traffic police disagrees with the prosecutor's data.
There are statistical reports with all traffic accidents categorized. For instance, if a tractor crushes an assistant during the roadworks, the investigation will list it as a road accident, but it will not be included in the statistics report. So there is a certain misunderstanding between the police and the prosecutor's office. There is a difference between the statistics of the traffic police and our data compiled upon the inspection from the reports of medical institutions. We analyzed it and then submitted everything what we have. The prosecutor's office also revealed a substantial debt in fines payment, since only half of $1.8 million issued in fines has been paid so far. Prosecutors also found 15,000 paper forms missing and 13,000 filled forms resting with no action taken. The Internal Affairs Department of the South Kazakhstan region will conduct an internal investigation on the reported matters.
Finally, Kızılorda police officers decided to help their fellow countrymen by organizing a streamlined giveaway of driver's licenses. Among other license holders, there are those who are mentally ill, as well as those who have been registered in the narcological hospital for years.
Kızılorda traffic police staff believe all citizens have the right to drive a car according to the Constitution. And to get the point across, 2 months ago they launched a special action tentatively named Support Your Fellow Countryman. Kızılorda residents took advantage of this generosity and many obtained driving permits without any hassles. Among them is a mental institution patient and 2 drug addicts undergoing outpatient treatment. It took them only 1 day to obtain their permits. Fortunately, according to traffic police records, none of them committed any violations, but the prosecutor's office still withdrew their licenses. According to our investigation, this was caused by the lack of proper department control by the traffic police. Now we are applying appropriate punitive measures to all of the officials involved in the matter.
This is all we have time for now. Thank you for watching. See you tomorrow.